Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating children's ministry curriculum created by Reverend Dan King. It's called God's Kind of People Seen by God. Now, right off the bat, I gotta tell you, this isn't your standard, predictable Sunday school lineup. We're gonna explore a core philosophy that's entirely built around the lives of people the world so often overlooks, underestimates, or just plain misunderstands. So, think about this for a second. How do the children in your life build their sense of worth today? Man, it's the heavy question, isn't it? Kids from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade are just wrestling so deeply with this modern crisis of identity, belonging, and performance. I mean, between the intense pressures of academics, the relentless comparisons we see on social media, and that constant drive to excel in extracurriculars, they're constantly trying to figure out if they actually matter and what they have to do to prove their worth. Well, this curriculum meets those exact urgent questions head on, and it does so with incredible compassion. Section 1. The Search for Belonging, a Crisis of Identity. Let's get into it. You know, there is a really sharp contrast in how we measure value. The world's view places this crushing weight on kids. It tells them day in and day out that their value is entirely based on being the strongest, the smartest, or the absolute most impressive person in the room. It's like this endless, exhausting performance treadmill. But the theological core of this curriculum, it flips that entirely on its head. It brings kids back to God's view, which is that true value is based on God seeing the heart. And honestly, that is a deeply freeing idea. You absolutely do not have to be the most impressive person in the room to be chosen, valued, and loved. Really, the whole thing boils down to this absolutely crucial truth. You are not what the world calls you, you are what God calls you. This is literally the central identity theme woven throughout the entire series. It tells kids that God's call isn't based on having it all together or, presenting this flawless image to the outside world. In fact, as you'll see, a lot of the people featured in this study start their stories completely unnoticed or sometimes even despised. The curriculum teaches kids that their ultimate value comes from who God says they are. It's about being fully known and loved, first and foremost, way before they ever do a single thing to earn it. Moving on to Section 2, the power of story, moving beyond the traditional lesson. So, instead of those traditional rapid-fire quiz-style lessons we might be used to, each session here actually centers on a narrative read aloud. Now, you might be wondering, why take this approach? Well, because Jesus taught through stories. Stories have this amazing ability to bypass our defenses and shape how we fundamentally understand the world. By carving out this protected, unhurried time, which is about 20 minutes of their 90-minute evening, children are just invited to sit, listen, and imagine. And let's be real, in our fast-paced, screen-saturated world, that kind of quiet space is incredibly rare. It allows younger kids to really grasp the beating heart of a narrative, while giving those older middle schoolers the space they need to wrestle with deeper, more complex questions of faith, totally free from the immediate pressure of needing to shout out a quick answer. To really understand the emotional weight of these stories, just imagine being a child hearing this during the week on Harriet Tubman. When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. Wow. The curriculum doesn't just recite cold, dry historical facts. Instead, it draws kids right into these immersive, intimate moments where these figures realize who they truly are in God's eyes. It's like Harriet looking at her hands in the golden light of freedom, discovering she is exactly who God called her to be, and not the property the world violently labeled her as. And this depth builds even further when we look at the 14th century mystic, Julian of Norwich. Wouldst thou learn thy Lord's meaning in this thing? Learn it well. Love was his meaning. This profound realization is actually taught during what the curriculum considers its most emotionally serious week. You see, Julian asked incredibly honest questions about suffering while she was confined to a sick room. So rather than avoiding hard topics, the curriculum uses her story to hold space for kids who might be hurting. It proves to them that faith doesn't always offer neat, tidy resolutions. Sometimes, it simply offers the comfort of divine presence right smack in the middle of the hardest questions of our lives. All right, Section 3, an unexpected cast, the unfolding story of God's people. Now, this isn't just your standard highlight reel of biblical antiquity featuring figures like David, Gideon, and Ruth. The curriculum intentionally marches forward through time. It goes right into the early church with Peter and Zacchaeus, stretches into the Middle Ages with St. Francis and Julian of Norwich, and pushes all the way into modern history with Harriet Tubman and Corrie ten Boom in the 1940s. By mapping it out this way, it shows K through 8 learners that God's unfolding story spans the absolute entirety of human history. It didn't magically stop at the end of the Bible, it continues today, and most importantly, they are actively invited to be part of it. And what do all these wildly diverse people have in common? Well, they are the unlikely chosen. God's kinds of people look literally nothing like what the world expects. Just think about it. A tax collector completely written off by society. A marginalized Samaritan woman drawing water at a well in the heat of the day. A wealthy merchant's son, St. Francis, who famously stripped off his expensive clothes right in the public square to give away all his status. And an enslaved woman who bravely followed God's voice to freedom. The curriculum powerfully reinforces to kids that shame, failure, fear, or worldly status absolutely do not disqualify anyone from being seen and powerfully used by God. No way. So, how does a typical night actually work? The curriculum outlines this really gentle 90-minute journey of a session. It starts off with a welcoming buffer for arrival and settle in, then it moves into snack and story for that immersive, unhurried read aloud we talked about. After that, it transitions into a creative response, follows up with a faith talk that's specifically tailored by age group, and then beautifully closes out with a peaceful compline prayer. It's a very deliberate rhythm that perfectly balances high-energy fun with profound listening, all leading to a really calming end to the evening. A super vital part of this rhythm is that creative response. The goal here is expressing faith in nonverbal ways. For instance, kids might paint a small hazelnut rock to remember Julian of Norwich's vision of being held in the palm of God's hand, or maybe they'll trace their own hands to remember Harriet Tubman's hands in the golden light. These generous, tactile activities give kids a really safe physical way to process incredibly deep theological truths, completely without the anxiety of having to verbalize perfectly formed textbook answers. Ultimately, the core message of God's kind of people comes down to this: faith is a journey, not a performance. The curriculum paints this wonderfully hopeful yet profoundly realistic picture of faith for young people. Because listen, these historical and biblical figures, they were not perfect, polished heroes who had it all together from day one. Actually, scratch that. They were deeply complex. They grew, they failed, they repented, and they slowly learned to trust. The aim here is to help kids build a durable, lasting faith that is rooted first in the undeniable fact that they are seen by God, and then allowing themselves to be formed by God over time. The curriculum concludes its 14-week run with a Build Your Own session, inviting a guest from the local church community to share their own lived story of identity and faith. So, I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. Whose story in your own community needs to be reframed by the truth that they are seen by God? How can we start looking at the people around us, especially those kids in our lives who are desperately searching for belonging, through the loving lens of a God who truly sees the heart? It's a powerful challenge, for sure. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you inspired to discover more about the unlikely people God chooses.